wanted to start out by asking a question. How many of you guys have ever been stuck in a very awkward conversation that you just wanted to end? Everything within you just wanted to run away, but you were stuck talking to that weird uncle who wants to talk to you about the government, or that one teacher who just is talking on and on about the most boring things ever, and everything within you just wants to run away and get out, but you can't and you're stuck. So as a pastor, every Sunday morning I have to greet people as they come to church. And I'm supposed to be very loving and kind and gracious, and I'm supposed to talk to everybody, which I do. But I know every Sunday morning there's a couple people that if they come and talk to me, I'm not leaving. Like, I'm stuck there for the rest of the day. They will not stop talking. And I'm trying to rack my brain, trying to think of what's the nicest way I can tell this person to leave me alone for the rest of my life. But I'm just too nice, and I can't. And I'll usually be like, someone's Avery, hello. And and I have to get out of the conversation somehow. It's not, okay, whatever. I remember when I was 19, I was working at a sawmill, okay? And I was working at the sawmill, and there were some interesting characters who were also working there. And so for 8 hours a day, I was standing, pulling wood off of a conveyor belt into different pallets, and I was just doing that for 8 hours a day. And then one of the guys next to me, his name was Chad. And Chad, which, by the way, if your name is Chad, you just kind of know he's this type of guy. He starts talking to me, and he's going on and on about how he was visited by aliens, and the aliens did experiments on him, and they adjusted his eyesight so now he could see really, really far. And he's just talking to me on and on about this, and he starts talking about how he actually has a demon protector, okay, like something out of Death Note or something like that. And the whole time, I'm just wanting this conversation to end. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable thing ever. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to talk to you about conspiracy theories. It can get really awkward, and there's a lot of people like that in the church, to be honest. But I remember just everything within me wanting to leave this conversation. And I have to admit that sometimes as a Christ follower, I feel like that's how I come across to other people. Like my non-Christian friends, whenever they talk to me about Jesus or hear that I'm a Christian, they're just like holding their breath, trying to leave this conversation. And I feel so bad because I don't want that to be how I come across. You know, within the world today, atheism is kind of the assumed right answer. Everybody kind of just assumes that, like, yeah, there's no God, right? We're scientific, we're rational people, we're very smart, but then there's like those weird Christians, those weird people who actually believe in God. They believe in the sky fairy, and we kind of feel like that weirdo who's like trying to like get them to come to church, and it's kind of the assumed position, right? We're not really taken seriously. We're kind of made fun of. And whenever we have doubts as followers of Jesus, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up in the church and I had doubts about my faith, whether God was real or not, everyone around me just kept telling me, you just got to have more faith. You just got to believe harder, right? They would quote verses like this in the Bible in Psalms chapter 14 that says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." I would get quoted this and be like, see, if you want to be a fool, believe that there's no God. And I was thinking, well, of course the Bible is going to say that. Of course the Bible will say that, right? The Bible assumes that God is real. Of course my pastor is going to say that. Of course my parent is going to say that. Of course my church is going to say that. How would you convince somebody who's not a Christ follower, who holds the Bible in no sort of esteem whatsoever, gives it no special treatment, how would you actually convince them to take God seriously outside of, well, the Bible says it's true, therefore it's true? And that's what the whole point of this series is about, okay? Faith is very important. Faith is the bedrock of our relationship with Jesus. We have to have faith in Jesus, but faith doesn't have to be blind faith. And growing up in the church so much, I would hear things like, well, you just have to believe harder. But they didn't give me anything to believe in. And so what I want to do in this series is I want to answer the question, why? Why do we do the things we do? And today I want to start by answering the question, why should I believe in God? Okay, we're going to look at the Bible, but more than that, I want to look at some rational, logical things when it comes to why I should actually put my faith in God, okay? Before we get there, I want to ask the question, what do you think God thinks of you when you doubt? What do you think God thinks when you have doubts about him? Does he look down on you? Does he shame you? Does he condemn you? I want to look quickly at a guy in the Bible named Thomas. Thomas was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and when Jesus died on the cross and was crucified, buried in the ground for 3 days, and then he resurrected from the dead, and he came to visit his disciples, but Thomas wasn't with them. Okay, and so all the disciples go to Thomas, and they're psyched. They're like, Thomas, like, God's back. Jesus is back. He rose from the dead. He's alive. And admittedly, Thomas is pretty skeptical, like most of us would be. And this is what it says in John chapter 20. It says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples came to him and said, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails that hung him to the cross, and I place my finger into the mark of the nails, and I place my hand into the side where he was pierced, I will not believe. And what happens? Jesus shows up to Thomas, and he shows them the marks in his hands and the mark in his side, and he shows them the evidence that he was looking for. Jesus doesn't look down on him. He doesn't condemn him. He doesn't get mad at him. He simply shows him the evidence and says, now believe. When you have doubts, God wants to show you the evidence. And that's what we want to do today. We want to look at what is the evidence for the existence of God. Because when we actually take the time to look for it, there's actually a lot of proof for God's existence. So, where can we look for evidence of God? Well, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with you. Let's start with me. We'll start with all of us, everything, every one of us, everything that has ever existed. The big question of where did we actually come from? If you're taking notes, the first place to look for evidence of God is the existence of the universe. The existence of the universe. Now, we all assume that the universe is real, right? We're not in a simulation. We're not just in somebody's dream. We believe we exist, right? But how do we exist? Where did we come from? How did all of this that we know to be real begin? Let's take this table, for example. Where did this table come from? There's 3 options when it comes to where this table came from, okay? Number 1, you can believe that this is an eternal table. It is an eternal table. This table has always existed since the beginning of time. It needs no creator. It was never created. It is eternal. It is an eternal table. Let's all bow down and worship the eternal table, right? Okay, that's your first option. The table's always existed. The second option is that table hasn't always existed. There was a time where it didn't exist, but it actually brought itself into existence, right? It didn't exist, and then all of a sudden, it existed. It brought itself into existence, and that's how we have the table today. Or your third option is that somebody created the table. That the table has a designer, that the table has a creator. And when it comes to our universe, we have the same 3 options. If you're taking notes, number 1, we can believe that the universe is eternal. That the universe has always existed since the beginning of time. It doesn't need to be created. It is eternal. Number 2, we can believe that the universe brought itself into existence out of nothing. It suddenly was. Or number 3, you can believe that the universe and everything in it and everyone has a creator. Now, for centuries, atheists held the first view. They said the universe is eternal, doesn't need a creator, it's always existed. People would say the universe is just there and that's all that there is. The universe has always existed. That was until the discovery of the Big Bang Theory. A guy named Edwin Hubble was studying space, and he discovered the expansion of the universe, where the universe is actually in a perpetual state of expansion, right? It's expanding, and that's where the Big Bang Theory came into effect, where they believed that at one point it actually all was one thing until it expanded in a random event, okay? And if you look up how old is the universe, you'll see 13.7 billion years old. The universe has not always existed. We have scientific proof that the universe actually had a beginning. Therefore, the universe is not eternal. That first option, the universe is eternal, is not a valid option. You can't hold that when it comes to how the universe came into being. It hasn't always existed. The universe had a beginning. So, that leaves you with 2 other options. Either the universe brought itself into existence out of nothing, or something outside of the universe created the universe. Something outside of the universe, outside of space and time, created what we know today to be our universe. So let me ask you, which one do you think is more plausible? That out of nothing, suddenly, randomly, came everything? By chance, by accident, nothing created everything? Or that something outside of the universe created it? Now, for this something outside of the universe to create it, it would have to be incredibly powerful. It would have to be eternal in and of itself. It would have to be outside of space and time. And wouldn't you know it, that is exactly how God describes himself in the Bible. When it comes to the existence of God, the first place we have to look is the existence of the universe, the question of origins. Where did we come from? For atheists, they have no answer except out of nothing, suddenly came everything. That's your option. But that's not the only place to look. If you're taking notes, the second place to look is this. We have to look at the complex fine-tuning of the universe. The complex fine-tuning of the universe. Okay, let's say that we are going on a hike together, right? Joe, we're gonna go hike the Grouse Grind, right? Let's do it. Right, so we're walking up the steps. I'm like sweating bullets. I'm about to pass out, and I look down at my feet, and oh my goodness, there's a rock. Whoa. And I turn to Joe and I say, Joe, where did this rock come from? What would be your answer? Right? It's just a rock. Who cares, first of all? But maybe you would give answers like, maybe it was part of the mountain and it like broke off and it tumbled down and it's there. Or maybe you would say, you know what, maybe that rock has actually been there for all of eternity. It's just always been there. Maybe it's nobody brought it there. It just has always been there. That would be a valid thought, maybe. It's just a rock. Who cares? Now, let's say we're hiking the grind and I look down and there's an iPhone at my feet. And I ask you, hey, Joe, where did this iPhone come from? Would you give me the same answer? Would you say, yeah, it was part of the mountain and it broke off and it just fell there? Would you say that, yeah, that rock's been there for hundreds of years? Why not? Because compared to a rock, an iPhone is incredibly complex. iPhones don't just spring out of the wild. iPhones don't just exist for centuries. iPhones are so much more complex, and it bears evidence of an intelligent design. Someone had to assemble that iPhone and place it there for it to exist. In the very same way that if you walked into a cave and you found some cave drawings on the wall, something like this, right? Not very complex, not very pretty, to be honest. It's just some random cave drawings of some antelope. What would be your logical conclusion of how those got there? Somebody drew them. You wouldn't think, oh, that's just part of the cave. It's just always been like that. What about if you were studying space and you heard one word from space? Somebody said nachos from space, right? What would be your logical conclusion? That there's aliens, right? Something out there in space is communicating with us. Even if it's something as small as the word, even if it's something as small as the word nachos, that communicates to us that there is intelligent design out there, okay? That there's intelligent life. Because when something as complex as an iPhone, as a cave drawing, as one word from space, those things don't just happen on their own. They don't just happen by accident. What does something as complex as DNA communicate to you? What does something as complex as your body, your eyeball, your brain communicate to you? Do these types of things just happen on accident? Our universe is incredibly complex. In fact, it's so complex that there are certain factors that if they weren't set to the exact, precise thing that it's set to, all life on earth couldn't exist. There's a few that I want to go through with you if you're taking notes. The first one is the gravitational constant. The gravitational constant is the gravitational force between two objects. And without it, planets and stars couldn't exist. Okay? So I want you to imagine at school you have lockers, right? And you have that little spinny thing and it has all the notches on it, right? What happens if you spin it and it doesn't get to the right number? It doesn't open if it's a good lock, right? If it's even off by one, it won't open. So I want you to imagine a combination lock with a bunch of notches on it, and we just spin it randomly and hope to get the right number. And if we happen to get the right number, life exists on Earth. If we're even one notch off, no life could exist on Earth. So the gravitational constant is 10 to the 60th power. That is 10 with 60 zeros after it, okay? We would spend all day just writing that number down. 10 with 60 zeros after it. Okay, that's an incredibly large number. Now, I want you to imagine a combination lock with 10 to the 60th power of numbers and notches all along it. And you close your eyes and you spin it and you land on one number and you get it right. That's your chances of the gravitational force being so precise that you got life on Earth. The next one is called the weak force. And this allows protons to turn into neutrons, vice versa. It basically allows chemistry to exist. Without it, chemistry wouldn't be able to exist. Okay? Imagine a combination lock with 10 to the 100th power notches on it. 10 with 100 zeros after it. That many numbers on a combination lock. You spin it, randomly guess, and you get it right. That's the odds of it being what it is for life to exist. And then the last one we're looking at is the cosmological constant. This measures the expansion or the acceleration of the universe. Without it, the universe wouldn't have expanded. No life on Earth would exist. 10 to the 120th power. 10 with 120 zeros after it. That many notches on your lock. Spin it randomly, hope to get the right number, life exists. If you're one number off, no life. All of these factors are working together in order for life on Earth to exist. And one scientist calculated all these numbers working together, and they determined that the odds of life existing on accident would be 10 to the 123rd power. That is arguably one of the biggest numbers in all of existence. Okay? Let me ask you, what do you think is more plausible? That we just happened to get lucky, and by chance, our universe came into being with that small of odds? Or that an eternal being, immensely powerful and all-knowing, set these factors to very specific factors so that life could exist? Do you want to know what the atheists' response to this is? Their response is, we just got lucky. Right? We just happened to be in the one universe where the factors and the conditions were just perfect in order for life to exist. And they claim that maybe there's other universes out there where the conditions weren't correct and life couldn't exist in their universe. And so now we're talking about the multiverse, and we're bringing Doctor Strange and Spider-Man into the mix, and there's no evidence at all that these other universes even exist. That's their only answer, is that we just got lucky. We just happened to be the one universe in all the multiverse that happened to have the right conditions for life to exist. I don't know about you guys, but it takes more faith on my part to believe that all of this happened on accident than to believe that God set it to those exact factors. If you're taking notes, our world bears undeniable evidence of design. All you have to do is look around. All you have to do is look around. And the last place we're going to do is we're going to look within us. If you're taking notes, we're going to look to the existence of objective moral values and duties. The existence of objective moral values and duties. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine on the screen. If you had to guess, who is this? He's a serial killer, in case you were wondering. He's actually a serial killer from BC. His name is Robert Pickton. In fact, he did all of his killings in Port Coquitlam, where I live. What did Robert Pickton do? Dozens of women he kidnapped, tortured, dismembered, and he fed them to his pigs to dispose of their bodies. He did all of this in Poco. And he did all of it for his own pleasure and his own enjoyment. Now let me ask you something. Is what Robert Pickton did wrong? Be careful how you answer. Is what Robert Pickton did evil? Disregard what the law says. Disregard what Canada says is legal or illegal. I'm not asking you if what he did was unfortunate. I'm not asking you if what he did was distasteful or unproductive. I'm asking you, is what Robert Pickton did wrong? Now, if you answered yes to that, then what you have just shown is that you believe in something called objective morality, meaning that no matter what you think is right and wrong, there is such a thing as right and wrong. Even if Canada allowed it, even if Robert Pickton lived in a country where it was totally legal to do what he did, it still would have been wrong. And if you believe that there is such a thing as right and wrong, you have to ask yourself, where did that come from? How do you know what's right and wrong? And what makes your morality better than Robert Pickton's? Who are you to say what he did was wrong? Who are you to say that it wasn't fine for him to do that? I mean, he obviously thought it was fine. Who gets the deciding vote when it comes to morality? You see, without God, right and wrong become an illusion. Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what's right and wrong? You know, you think that murdering old ladies is what's in, and that's great. And I think that it's wrong, right? Tomato, tomato. You like strawberry, I like vanilla. You like killing old ladies and babies, and I think that's morally wrong and bad. Let's just all just get along, right? You can have your morality, I can have my morality. And this is where this idea of subjective truth comes in, right? Where you can just believe what you believe, and I can believe what I believe, and we're both right. But the reality is we know that there are certain things that are right and there are certain things that are wrong. But without God, if you're taking notes, right and wrong would simply be a matter of opinion. Who decides what's right and wrong? Who are you to say that my way is wrong? How do atheists explain morality? Well, they say it should be up to the individual, right? They say, you decide your morality for yourself, but that wouldn't fly because we all know that Robert Pickton shouldn't be able to decide his own morality. He thought what he did was right. Then they say it's society. We as a society have just agreed upon these certain things that we have decided are right and what's wrong. And yet we would look at countries that have terrible laws that are legal, terrible things that people can do that's totally legal in other countries, and we would still say, no, that's wrong. And then atheists will say, well, maybe it's due to evolution. Maybe it's due to natural selection, right? We have just evolved as a species in order to determine what is the beneficial way for us to survive as a species. But that doesn't make sense either, because we naturally, instinctively know that we want to protect those who can't even contribute to society. Even though the elderly person is retired and they're not working and they're sucking up resources, we wouldn't just kill them off. I mean, there'd be more for us to go around, wouldn't there? The sick, the disabled, we protect them. Why? Because they have value. Natural selection doesn't make sense if I want to stay faithful to one person my whole life. Natural selection would mean I would want to sleep around all I could. It would help me to be able to pass on my genes better, right? Better chance of my species surviving. No, none of these things make sense. Morality exists, and the only explanation for that is God. God has given us his instinctive right and wrong in our lives. We know in our hearts that there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. In fact, the Bible says this in Romans chapter 2. It says they demonstrate that God's law is written on their hearts for their own conscience and thoughts, either accuse them or tell them what they are doing right. You know what's right and wrong, and it's because God has given you a conscience. So these are just three evidences for God's existence. These are questions that are best explained with a worldview that says God. So, after being presented with the evidence, what do you think is more plausible? That God exists, and that he created you and loves you, and that he designed our universe and gave you a conscience, or that our universe came about on accident, that all of the factors that make our universe capable of producing life, they're just random, we just got lucky, that we somehow know what's right and wrong, even though there's no explanation for it. What do you think is more plausible? You You don't have to have 100% certainty that God is real. Even if you have 51% certainty, you have reasonable grounds to believe it over believing that everything just came about on accident. See, if you look for the evidence is there. And the Bible affirms this. It says this in Romans. It says, for ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. What about you? What do you believe? You may want to put off this question and not think about it, but I would challenge you. This is the most important question you can answer in your entire life. Is there a God? Because I know you think your life is long, but any one of us can walk out this door and not wake up tomorrow. I know we don't want to think about that, but the reality is our life could be over in an instant. Where are you going after that? Have you answered the biggest questions of life? Suddenly, if you knew you had 24 hours to live, you wouldn't care about your crush. You wouldn't care about your school. You wouldn't care about your work. You wouldn't care about any of that. You would care about the big question of what's going to happen to me after I die. This is arguably the biggest question you'll ever answer in your life. And I would challenge you, a secular worldview that doesn't believe in God is left with only hopelessness. The answer to that question of what happens to me after I die is nothing. And it's no wonder that so many people in our world today struggle with mental health and struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts. Why? Because they have no hope. There's no God out there to save them. You have no meaning for your life, no purpose at all. You wake up every day, you try to find some happiness in this life, and then you go to sleep. And if your life is great and you're healthy and you have a lot of money and you have a lot of friends and you're not lonely, then great, live your life, party. But what happens when you struggle with depression? What happens when you lose your job? What happens when your friends betray you? And all you're left with is hopelessness and despair. Atheism says, well, if you're losing, it's because you're a loser. There's no God out there to save you. You got to make your own happiness. But the beauty of the gospel is that there is a God, and he loves you, and he created you, and he has a plan for you, and he is there to save you in your suffering. He is there to save you in your mess, and he wants to desperately. Will you open yourself up to that? Will you look up to the heavens and say, God, I believe in you. I need you. Come and save me. Because he's ready to do that. Your life has meaning. It's not hopeless. He wants a relationship with you. And if you've never before made a decision to follow Jesus and accept that relationship, I'm going to give you an opportunity right now.